Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the transition table. Today, I am excited to have Paige Wiese here with Tree Ring Digital, and she is going to talk to us about something that I think a lot of businesses don't think about, and that is your digital assets. So, Paige, why don't you tell me a little bit about what you do at Tree Ring?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me on. Excited to be here with you. At Tree Ring Digital, we're more a digital continuity business, which is really focused on how do we prepare the company for exit and then keep a lot of that continuity as you go through that transition period. And we focus most specifically on the digital assets that go along with that. So is the website operating in good? Is it in good health? Do you know where the logins are? Do you understand where it's hosted? So we're really looking at how transferable is that company that you're building prior to going to exit.
And what are the key things that you see frequently that aren't working out appropriately for business owners or that they need to think about or work on?
Typically, a couple of the big ones we see are going to be, I don't actually have any idea where my domain is or who has the login details. Typically, a vendor at some point or someone on the company has set that up and they just never asked. So, ownership of the domain name and website would be part of that. I think another one we hear is, oh, there's an email floating around someplace that has the login details. I just have to go find it. And then others are, I've been trying to get access to that, but the vendor won't return my phone calls or emails. I haven't been able to get a hold of them and I don't know how to access it. So those are a lot of the common issues that we start running into when we're looking at businesses that are getting ready to exit.
And another thing, and obviously this is something that people should be looking at in their business way before they're ready to exit, whatever that looks like. But another thing that you and I have talked about because I had a situation is the other things, the LinkedIn page, the Facebook page, the Google page. Let's talk about that a little bit because I think people really don't think about that.
No, and that's like when we talk about digital assets, often they're like, what even is a digital asset, right? And so while commonly they'll think of domain name, website, email address, they're really not looking at all of the digital assets that go into it, and that there is value in things like you mentioned, your Google business profile. A company that's got 2 reviews compared to 1,000 reviews, there's a different value in that. A 2 point star or 2.5 star review to a 5 star rating, there's value in that. And so businesses and the buyers are looking at what are we trying to recover and how do we have to mitigate whatever might already be representing that brand if we were to acquire this. So that's one example of, hey, there's value in this digital asset, but most people just look at it as, oh no, I have a Google business. I don't even know who owns my Google business listing or if I've ever claimed it, right? So there's these various aspects, but who gets it post transaction? So a lot of times it's written in the legal paperwork that all assets are transferable, but no one's actually verifying. And there's also not really a conversation around, to your point, what do we do with the Google My Business profile? What do we do with the Facebook? I've seen businesses that keep it and rebrand it for the new company and keep the reviews so they don't have to start over.
And
That's not how that works.
we talked about that because we once sold a coffee shop where the new owner was eventually going to rebrand, but he wanted the Google reviews because he didn't want to have to start from scratch. And the seller, who was actually transitioning to just roasting coffee, was not willing to do that. So that ended up being a post transaction negotiation. And I think if we had thought of that beforehand, that would have been something we could have dealt with. But I think that's just one example of many. Do you have other stories like that?
So another one is going to be we had a hotel that was getting ready to or had acquired. They were asking for all of the different pieces, the Expedia, the website, the social profiles, all of these things. And post-transaction it was like, we don't have Expedia. And they're like, there's a profile for it right here. We would like access to it. And they're like, we don't own that. We don't know how to access that. We can't hand that to you. And so it was all of this historical data that was just lost just because no one actually knew who the ownership was. But that was part of what they were wanting when they acquired the business was let's get all of the historical data so we can go back and remarket to these people and have a list to work off of instead of trying to start from scratch. And so that's what we're seeing mostly right now is so much of this is coming up post-transaction. But I always say what it's doing is creating even more savvy buyers. And so these savvy buyers are going to start asking these questions as we are in due diligence. And what we're going to find is a lot of the owners don't know. And so they start to hem and haw and they're like, ah, I don't know where that's at. It's someplace. I'm sure we can find it. But that's not what the buyer wants to hear. And as you've said, as they've gone through these situations, they're gonna start going, I don't know how much I really trust what else you may or may not have ownership to. And it's gonna start to devalue or have them just walk away from the deal entirely.
So, how can a business owner, way before they're looking to sell, say they come to us at Exit Factor and say, what can I do now to ensure that value is there? And I just want to add a twist. I used to do work with some hotels that didn't have flags, and the reservation system was a key component, right? Even if they weren't a Marriott, if they got on certain reservation systems, that made a huge difference for occupancy,
Well, and
for
that's
example.
that's where we really get into digital assets is the entire digital ecosystem. It can be the third-party tools, it can be the industry specific tools. It doesn't have, even if you've got reviews using Avo for law firms, that's still a digital asset, right? And how do we transfer that? If you were running ads on Avo, that's a digital asset. How do we transfer that? So, to your point, it's the entire digital ecosystem that makes that company run. So, that's really where they need to get ahead of it.
So, what are some concrete steps that a business owner could take now to help them start getting their hands around some of these things?
Yeah, the first concrete step is just start documenting. And I don't care originally and initially how you are. I'd rather it be documented someplace, whether you're using a password manager or something like that. But as tools are being used, really start looking at how do we log in? What does this look like? Whose account is it set up? But where we're also starting to see, and probably the hardest to keep track of, is the two-factor authentication. That's new within the last 3, 5 years, but extremely aggressive more recently. But most companies, like employees, will go in and be like, I'm tired of asking the boss for this. I'm just going to set it up on mine. So while the boss knows the login details, they didn't realize that the 2FA is now changed to an employee. Now employee is no longer with the company. And now we got to go figure out how do we recover that and what does that look like and how long is this downtime going to impact the company operation. So that's where it's way more than just do I have the logins? And that's also why login managers just aren't a great tool. It's helpful and convenient, but not for the overall management of ownership of these digital assets.
Although I've been using 1Password, and recently they've been allowing me to use passkeys for two-factor authentication. Is that a good idea for a business owner to use? Because if somebody has the overall password for the 1Password, they can then access the passkeys. What are
It's
your
a
thoughts
really,
on that?
really good tool and it is helpful. And it's so nice that they've been bringing out that. I think it also just comes up to how are things set up. So sometimes what we see within organizations, especially on a little bit smaller side, they have one account for the entire team, not in 1Password, but for the specific thing. It could be Facebook. So it's one login for the
Right.
entire company Facebook. And so now all of it's tied to that. So how do we make sure that should something happen, you do in fact still have ownership too? So there's those pieces and little areas that it still starts to come in. Or, yes, it's great that you've got that set up, but if the vendor never gave you access or ownership to Google Analytics, for example, it doesn't matter what tool you're using, right? You
Right.
still need to know what questions to go in and ask and say, hey, I know you set that up, but can you add me as an owner to that account too? And
Mhm.
far too often, no, they don't ask and go back and do it. So there's pros and cons to those different models for sure.
That's a really good point because a lot of people use vendors, particularly marketers, to manage their Google AdWords and their analytics. So that's something I hadn't thought of. So
And read the
really good.
contract is a lot, especially Google Ads. A lot of times, if they set up the account, That's not going with you when you end that contract. It's going to stay with that vendor, and that vendor is just going to delete the account and make you start all over again. And so, definitely areas that how do you read the contracts first and know who owns that Google Ad account? And then afterwards, as soon as it's set up, start asking the questions. I need ownership. I need to have the right access to this. I don't just want manager, I want admin owner rights to these accounts.
Wow, that's all really, really great information. So, as we wrap up, do you have any tips, tricks, any final thoughts before we finish up for today?
Like I said, document is one, and then the other is we do have an ownership mapping framework that's going to walk them through all of that. I say that too is like a business owner, as an advisor, whatever that looks like. There's 300 data points that you are looking at to make sure that that company is transferable. And so it's really important to get ahead of that and to start using, and we've got the digital checklist that you can download to start figuring out where are some of these gaps, where am I maybe not putting enough attention to, so that you can really start to get a grasp on how much work is
Okay.
this going to be as I prepare to exit.
And is this something that I can put in the show notes so people can download it?
Yeah, absolutely. You can download it at treeringdigital.com/TT.
And I will put that in the show notes so everybody has access to that as well. And Paige, thank you so much for your time today. This has been really, really helpful. And I learned some things, and I certainly learned some things that I can do with our clients. So thank you very much. And I will see everyone next week with the transition table.